we are sitting now in front of your, the first part of your installation of your piece, 7,000 Dead Trees. And how many trees did you put on the wall behind you?
There are about 1,000. 1,004 is what I counted. Not quite sure, but about 1,000.
It's 1,004 trees on this wall in the studio, and it's yeah, the wall is really packed with small, rather small photos of dead trees. And you said to me that it's a chronological order. So when did you start to take photos of dead trees?
The first photos were made already in August last year, in 2020, before the idea of this project had emerged. I was walking in the Black Forest in Germany, and somehow these dead trees that you can see there quite often came somehow to my focus, to my mind, and I started to think about it's something interesting. Let's do some photos of them without knowing what it would, where it would lead in the end. And then in the beginning of October, in September, I started to think about this project of the 7,000 dead trees, and the first photos were done in the beginning of October. And this is what you can see on the left side, the August-October photos, and it's a sort of rough chronology to the other side, to end of November photos.
And these are photos that you took, but also quite a number of people contributed.
Yes, yeah. It's there are two sources for these photos. The one is myself. Since October, quite regularly, I walk through forests here around Cologne, mainly in the Eifel, but also in other parts, and collect dead trees and make photos of them. The other source is a group of people who send photos to me. In the beginning of this project, I sent around an email, an invitation to other people, asking them to make photos of dead trees wherever they are and send them to me. And this is something that worked very well. I sent it to a couple of people, and now there are sometimes people sending photos to me that I've never known before, and I've never seen them. So there is a sort of dynamic working in this project, which is very important for this whole piece, because this is the aspect of the social sculpture, which leads already to Joseph Beuys, who is, of course, in the background of this work.
Idea. Yeah. How many people have contributed so far?
About 100.
From different countries?
From different countries, mainly from Germany, of course, but there's quite a number from Switzerland, from France, a couple of people from the US, from Spain. So, yeah, yeah.
You said that when you were walking or hiking in the Black Forest last summer, you suddenly were attracted to these dead trees that you saw there, and yeah, that were there to a certain degree, alarming degree. Did you? I don't know if you can say that, but was it an emotional reaction, or was it an aesthetic, artistic impulse?
First of all, it was a kind of surprise. I was not expecting that there were so much dead trees in the Black Forest. And the Black Forest has a very special story, so the problem is older than the actual problem of the last 3 summers, which were very hot and very dry in Germany and Middle Europe. But still, I was not expecting so much dead trees, so it was a surprise. And the second was an aesthetic idea, because I saw there are a lot of trees which look very beautiful. Also in the landscape, in this big mountains. Sometimes it just looks beautiful.
Even though they are dead.
Even though, or maybe because they are dead, so they look different to the others, and the color of very often gray is very beautiful. But this was only the start. I mean, the question of the aesthetics is still important, of course, but it's not what I'm looking for. I asked the people I invited to send or to collect photos for me, I asked them not to do really beautiful photos of beautiful trees, but more sort of snapshots aesthetics, where you sometimes really have to look for the dead tree. So it's not, there are some very beautiful photos and very beautiful trees on the wall, but also a lot of photos which don't look like something you would do to put it on your wall.
So it has more quality of documentation or collection.
Yeah, collection. Documentation is also not exactly the right thing, but it's a collection, and it's not the idea, let's show the beauty of dead trees, which is a possible form, but not what I'm interested in.
So what is the idea? I know that you had already thought about doing some performances in response or in relation to Joseph Beuys, who has a special year of his 100th birthday in 2021. So as an artist, you already were thinking about something more in the lines of your, I guess, your former performance art work that has to do a lot with voice work. So what are you looking for with this project? What is the focus of your attention? Is it a response to Beuys in a way?
Yes, yes, it is. Of course, in my research about Beuys' work and his life and his approach to art, I of course came along the 7,000 Oaks, one of the most important and most impressive artworks of the end of the 20th century, I think. And but somehow I saw that maybe 40 years after this project that began in 1982 and was finished in 1987 at the Documenta, I was thinking that maybe it needs some sort of addition nowadays after 40 years.
Something is missing.
Something, yeah, missing. Maybe something is missing today, because in Beuys' work, he was focusing very much on what I call his optimism and his active optimism. He was very much somebody who was acting, who was doing things, and who had an idea of, let's try, there is a chance, we do it, and let's try to be an artist for everybody. And this is something that is very strong and is still good today, so I don't want to argue against that. On the contrary, I want to continue it in another way and to bring into this idea of this 7,000 trees another aspect of Beuys' work, which was also very important, and that is the way he understood the relation between men and women, mankind, humankind on the one side, and the world, the trees, the plants, the animals, and so on, which was, of course, very poetic, and this means it was a form of relation that is a sort of dialogue. So these things, these animals, these plants, they speak to us. And there is a very strong relation, also a very strong relation through the aspect of suffering. Beuys was somebody who talked a lot about the question that the animals and the trees, especially the trees, are suffering, and that they have their own intelligence, that we have to learn from them again, and that the suffering they have is something that is related to ourselves, so it has to do with our own suffering.
We have afflicted it on them, their
in
suffering?
some way, yes, exactly, and it comes back to us, whether we want it or not, whether we feel it or not. But he, Beuys as an artist, said we do feel it, and we have to get to become conscious of this suffering. And this is something that was not so much involved in Beuys' initial or original work with the 7,000 Oaks, but is something that I want to point out a little bit,
highlight
on, with my idea of the 7,000 photos of dead trees. Yeah.
So you're highlighting the point or the aspect that 40 years after the original artwork of Beuys, what we see in our surroundings when we walk in the woods, we see that many trees are dying and that it has an effect on us. Is that about what you're thinking?
Yeah, I mean, if you talk about diversity of nature, if you talk about forests dying, we are today in a situation which is much worse than it was in the 1980s. There were other things which were worse in the 80s, for instance, the quality of water in the rivers and everything, but these aspects are much worse today. And on a global level, we are today in a much more dramatic situation of nature, of the world, of the earth, than we were 40 years ago. Although in the 80s, people like Beuys, and even in the 70s and 60s, were aware that we have to change our way of living for not facing a real disaster, which we have now. I mean, we are in the disaster of climate change that already had started with all the different effects, and the dying of trees, mainly here in Germany, Middle Europe, in this part, has of course to do with it, because it is caused by 3 very hot summers and very dry summers that we had in the last 3 years here in Germany. And maybe it's important to say, of course, the dying of trees in itself is something that is just part of the movement of nature, of the circles of nature, the seasons and everything. So there's nothing wrong with the idea that trees die, but the form and the amount of dying trees that we have now has nothing to do with this natural form of growing and dying and so on.
Yeah.
But it is something that is caused by our unnatural way of dealing with the world.
So would you say that your project is also a project about honoring or acknowledging this suffering that is happening? Because you talked about Beuys' idea of the suffering of the trees, but I think also we as human beings suffer through this, and we also grieve for what we are losing at the moment.
Yeah. This is one aspect that is important for myself, and what I hear from people who support my project, who send photos and so on, it's that a lot of them say, since I am looking for dead trees in the forests, I see how much dead trees are there. Before that, I had no idea. I was walking around and I didn't see them. And this is something that's, of course, very important. We start to get conscious of what is happening, and this project is a very small, of course, contribution to this movement, to at least to see what is happening and to react on an emotional level with grieving, maybe, with becoming conscious of the suffering of the world and maybe of ourselves through it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And on the other hand, when we look at this wall with 1,000 photos, it has a very strong aesthetic quality. That's something you said in the beginning. Those dead trees can look very beautiful. And when we look at the wall, the amount of the photos on the wall, the overall impression is a very powerful expression. And I noticed that people had been saying, who had been here to see the installation, that they had the impression what they saw wasn't dead at all. It gave a very alive impression. That's something very interesting, isn't it?
Yeah. And I agree that there is this sort of dynamic and ambivalence between if you see the wall itself with its colors, with its structures and so on, it looks not dead at all. But if you get closer and look at every photo, and on each photo you see at least one dead tree, you can see it. Sometimes you really have to look for it. It's not always absolutely obvious. And this is a movement which is very good, very important, because the death, the dying of the trees in a vital context, and this it needs some sort of focusing, of movement, of getting closer, finding a distance to relate to this whole situation.
So it's a question of how you position yourself towards this.
Exactly. I just now think it's a little bit like what I said before. If you go for a walk in a forest, if it's not a fir tree forest which is really dead at all. This is also happens nowadays. You have sometimes whole forests who are dead. So there it's so obvious you can't
avoid it.
Yeah, you can't avoid it. But in other parts, you see a forest and think, oh, it looks quite nice, it's okay. But only if you go inside of the forest, then you see that there are so much dead trees inside it, and that it happens there too. And this is maybe nearly the same than here. You see the wall and you think, something beautiful, colorful, or whatever.
Overwhelming even, because it's really, this whole wall is filled with photos, and it has a wow effect.
Yeah. But then you get closer and you see, there are the dead trees. They are there, although I don't see them in the first sight.
And I don't. And it takes some time to really take in what it means, I guess.
Yeah, I hope so. Yeah, this is what art should do. Make people think what it means.
Earlier we were touching on the subject of the social sculpture, and could you say a couple of words about that? In what way are you thinking of your project as related to a social sculpture?
Yeah, and maybe the way I use this word is not exactly the same than Beuys did, but for me it's important very often in projects who are a little bit bigger, not just a performance or a concert or whatever, that it's not about being an artist who does some sort of work that you can put on the wall or put in a space and people watch it and think, oh, it's great, or I don't like it, or whatever, and that's it. That I'm much more interested in works where I am involved in a process with other people. Maybe if I am the one who initiated the work, like in this project, of course my role is special. I am the one who decides which sort of form the whole project will have, and etc. But still, I'm not the only one who is involved in finding the material, in the aesthetics, because it is depending on what other people send to me.
Yeah.
Of course, I do from the collection. Sometimes a photo you can't use it because it's not sharp or whatever. But apart from that, I use the photos that come, and this is something that's very important, I think, for me. It's to have forms of involvement and not just the artist on the one side and the viewer on the other side, or the listener on the other side.
So that brings me to the subject of the stones, the pieces of stone. in the original artwork of Beuys, the 7,000 Oaks, there are also stone. There's also stone involved, and you thought about how to bring that in your project.
Yes, in the 7,000 Oaks, Beuys put to every planted oak one pretty big stone, basalt stone, 1.20 meter high, very beautiful, and put it beside the tree. And it's a very beautiful dynamic in this, because the stone, of course, keeps its form over the decades, but the tree grows. So there's a sort of stability of keeping form and movement, development, and everything. So that's very beautiful. So I thought somehow we need to have stone in this project. And the first thing was that I asked people who sent me photos also to collect a stone or two from the regions, the parts where they made the photos, and send them to me so that I can use them or put them into the installation. And this works more or less. It's not always easy to send the stone. Sometimes people forget it. Even myself, I forget it sometimes when I collect photos. But still, there are quite a few smaller stones, and for the next installations that I hope to do with these photos, maybe with more than this 1,000. As I said, I hope to get 7,000 at the moment. We have about 5,000, so it could be much bigger than this one. I will ask the people who visit the installation to bring a stone as well. So again, to have a sort of involvement in the whole project and a contribution that is more than just coming and saying, oh, I like it or I don't like it. And the other part is I was wondering if I could use a basalt stone in the installation, but in doing some research it got obvious that this is not a good idea, because it's too close to Beuys' work, of course, and it is somehow too sound if you have this beautiful stone in one piece. So I decided to do it in another way with a little bit smaller pieces, which don't look so much like something so beautiful and stable.
Yeah. So it's more, you're more pointing out a kind of fractured reality there.
Yeah.
I really like this idea, or this project of people bringing stones. It has to me it is a gesture of honoring also what's going on in the woods and with the trees, and honoring also our grief, I guess, about what's going on. So you were speaking about what your visions are for your project. How could an installation, what kind of form would an installation have with 7,000 photos in the end? What do you envision?
I have two forms in my mind for the moment which might work. The first one is related to what you can see here, and just would be the idea to have a wall big enough or long enough, let's say not too high, long enough, where you could really put all 7,000 photos on it.
So how would you envision the project to be when you're installing 7,000 photos?
So there are two ideas in my mind for the moment. The first is concretely related to what you can see here. So it would be the idea to have a wall big enough, or better, long enough, to put 7,000 photos on it. That needs quite a big wall.
Space, a lot of space.
But I think it would work quite well. From what I see here, with this first attempt, with 1,000 photos, I think the idea to have one wall where you can see all these photos could work very beautifully.
And then people would move along that wall, and it would have a kind of the same chronology that...
Yes, exactly. It would have the chronology of probably of 1 year. I hope to have the 7,000 together at the end of this year, and then you could really see the seasons somehow a little bit. I mean, not absolutely clear, but it's you could see a sort of chronology, I think. The second idea is that I would try to have a space where you put the photos on all the walls in the space. So maybe something that is a little bit more like a memorial from the atmosphere you would have there, less than an exhibition or an installation, so that you would really move into the space and be surrounded by these photos. I see it in my in a vision. I see it a little bit darker, so that you would work with light to see the different or the single trees a little bit more. But also this needs a good space.
You would maybe have torches to light up the...
Yes, a little bit. So this is something I have in my mind, but of course it depends on the space in the end. You never know before. And I'm not sure if it would work, but it's worth to try. Let's see.